On the night of April 21st, 2026, a flight number quietly died. For 97 years, Hawaiian Airlines flights had carried the code HA. It survived the Second World War. It survived 2 bankruptcies. It survived the entire jet age without a single passenger fatality, the best safety record of any airline in America. Then, engineers ran a database migration overnight, and by morning, flight HA865 was flight AS865. The code was gone. The airline that absorbed it started in 1932, when a fur trader named Mac McGee, who had arrived in Alaska as a stowaway, bought a 3-seat Stinson to haul pelts out of Bristol Bay. That bush operation now owns Hawaiian Airlines. It flies Boeing 787s from Seattle to London, Rome, Tokyo, and Seoul. And in January 2026, its chief executive said something out loud that nobody outside the industry noticed. He said Alaska is ready to compete as one of 4 global U.S. airlines. Not 5th, not a regional carrier with some long-haul routes. 4th, alongside Delta, United, and American. So, is that real? Or is it the most ambitious piece of corporate branding in American aviation right now? Start with the deal, because the price tells you how strange this was. On December 3, 2023, Alaska announced it was buying Hawaiian Airlines for $18 a share. Hawaiian had closed the previous Friday at $4.86. That's a premium of roughly 270%. Hawaiian stock jumped 174% in a single day. Total value, about $1.9 billion, including roughly $900 million of Hawaiian's debt. Alaska's finance chief described it as, quote, very manageable. Everyone expected the government to kill it. The Justice Department had just blocked JetBlue's attempt to buy Spirit. Instead, in August 2024, the DOJ declined to sue. The Transportation Department cleared it a month later, and the deal closed on September 18, 2024. But the approval came with strings, binding for 6 years. Alaska has to protect the value of both airlines' frequent flyer miles. It has to keep flying key routes between Hawaii and the mainland and between the islands themselves. It has to guarantee competitive access at Honolulu, provide fee-free family seating, and lower costs for military families. In other words, you can buy Hawaii's airline. You cannot strand Hawaii. Then came the integration, and it moved fast. Single operating certificate from the FAA in October 2025, which is the moment Hawaiian legally ceased to exist as an independent airline. Loyalty programs merged into a new brand called Atmos Rewards. Reservation systems merged onto one platform in April 2026. The last flight ever to carry Hawaiian's radio call sign was HA866 from Pago Pago to Honolulu on October 29, 2025. Alaska says it's keeping Hawaiian as a brand. The flowers stay on the tails. But history is not encouraging. When Alaska bought Virgin America, that brand vanished. When Delta bought Northwest, same. Losing the flight code is usually the first domino. So why spend $1.9 billion on an airline 8 hours from your headquarters? Because Alaska wasn't buying an airline, it was buying an aircraft type. Here's the thing about Alaska Airlines that made this whole story unlikely. Alaska flew Boeing 737s. Only Boeing 737s, plus small Embraer regional jets. That was the entire strategy. One aircraft type, one set of maintenance procedures, one pilot training pipeline, minimum cost. That fleet is also completely incapable of flying to Europe or Asia. Hawaiian had what Alaska didn't. Airbus A330s, Airbus A321neos, Boeing 717s for island hopping, and critically, brand new Boeing 787-9 Dreamliners, aircraft that can fly 10,000 miles non-stop. So overnight, the most disciplined single-fleet airline in America became a mixed fleet operator with 4 different manufacturers' aircraft. Every airline planner will tell you that's expensive and complicated. Alaska's solution is genuinely clever. Split the fleet by geography and by brand. All the Dreamliners go to Seattle, painted in Alaska colors, flying international long haul. All the A330s stay in Honolulu under the Hawaiian brand, flying to Asia and the South Pacific. And then Alaska went shopping. In January 2026, it placed the largest aircraft order in its 94-year history, 105 Boeing 737-10s, plus 5 more Dreamliners with options for 35 more narrow-bodies. That takes its committed Dreamliner fleet to 17 aircraft and grows the group past 475 planes by 2030. But here's the detail that says the most about how unfinished this all is. Those Seattle Dreamliners flying to London and Rome, many are crewed by Hawaiian pilots. The acquired airlines crews are flying the acquiring airline's flagship routes, while their own contract is still unsigned. Negotiations opened in February 2025. As of mid-2026, roughly 3,300 Alaska pilots and 1,200 Hawaiian pilots still work under separate agreements, which means crews can't be freely assigned across the combined operation. The airline is flying global routes with a labor structure that hasn't caught up yet.
Now watch how fast the network appeared. May 12, 2025, Seattle to Tokyo Narita. Daily, initially on an inherited Hawaiian A330. September 12, 2025, Seattle to Seoul Incheon. April 2026, Seattle to Rome, first Europe route in the airline's history. The CEO, Ben Minicucci, is Italian-American. His parents emigrated from Italy, and his statement ended with, quote, "Andiamo, let's go." May 21st, 2026, Seattle to London Heathrow. Daily, year-round. Alaska's own press release described the route as reinforcing its position as the 4th largest global airline in the United States. A week later, Seattle to Reykjavik. 5 intercontinental destinations in 13 months at an airline that had none. And they've put a real product on them, a business class called Suites, 34 seats, custom bedding, salt and straw ice cream service. That's not a regional carrier's cabin. That's an airline trying to be taken seriously by the people who pay $4,000 for a seat. Meanwhile, they've been ruthless about what doesn't work. Honolulu to Boston, Honolulu to Seoul, Honolulu to Fukuoka, all cut in November 2025. Those A330s were redeployed towards Seattle instead. That tells you the real strategy. Alaska isn't running Hawaii's international network, it's harvesting it, pulling aircraft out of Honolulu and pointing them at Seattle, where the connections are. And the connections are working. Alaska says half of all US originating tickets on the Tokyo route came from more than 80 cities beyond Seattle. That's the entire justification for the strategy in one statistic. People in Boise and Spokane and Sacramento connecting through Seattle to Asia instead of driving traffic to Delta. The target is 12 international wide-body destinations from Seattle by 2030. They're 5 in. But there's an airline in Seattle that has spent a decade preparing for exactly this. Delta started building Seattle into a hub in 2014, and it did it by breaking up with Alaska. For years, Delta fed passengers to Alaska's West Coast network. Then, Delta decided it wanted Seattle as its own Asia gateway, ended the partnership, and started competing directly with the airline whose name is on the state next door. 12 years later, here's where that stands. Alaska Air Group carries about 52% of everyone moving through SeaTac. Delta carries around 24%. Alaska is clearly the bigger airline at Seattle, but Delta is bigger internationally at Seattle, and that's the fight. And Delta is not conceding it. When Alaska announced Rome, Delta announced Rome within days. Delta has added Seattle to Barcelona, and in March 2027, Delta is returning to Seattle-Tokyo Narita with an A330neo, giving it 2 Tokyo routes against Alaska's 1. For summer 2026, the Seattle-Tokyo market splits almost evenly, Alaska at roughly 29% of capacity, Delta at 28.6%. That's not dominance,
That's a knife fight. The difference is what each airline can absorb. Delta made $58.3 billion in revenue in 2025. Alaska made about $14.2 billion. Delta can lose money in Seattle for a decade and not notice. Alaska cannot.
So let's actually test the claim. What makes an airline global? Three things, roughly. Wide-body aircraft flying intercontinental routes, membership in a global alliance, and meaningful international revenue. Alaska has the first two. Its Dreamliners are flying. Both brands are now inside oneworld. Hawaiian joined in April 2026 as the alliance's 16th member, which means American and British Airways members can now redeem miles on flights between Hawaii Islands. The third one is where it gets difficult. Alaska has 5 long-haul destinations. Delta and United each have dozens, with hundreds of wide-bodies. Alaska has nothing to South America, nothing to Africa, nothing to the Middle East, nothing to India, and one city in continental Europe. The overwhelming majority of its revenue still comes from domestic West Coast flying. And the financials right now are not the picture of an ascendant global carrier. Alaska's net profit in 2025 fell to $100 million, down from $395 million the year before. In the second quarter of 2026, it posted a $76 million loss driven by fuel, even as revenue grew 10%. Then there's the operational record. 3 times in roughly 15 months, Alaska grounded its entire fleet because of IT failures. The worst, in October 2025, canceled more than 360 flights and affected around 49,000 passengers. None were cyber attacks, just systems breaking. That's a hard thing to square with a global airline's prowess. And the irony sits right at the center of this story. The airline with the cleanest safety record in America, 96 years, 0 passenger fatalities, was bought by the airline that had a door plug blow out of a 737 at 14,000 feet in January 2024 with 4 bolts missing. So here's the honest answer. Alaska is not America's 4th global airline today. It's too small, too domestic, and too operationally fragile to claim that. But for the first time in 94 years, it's genuinely building one. It has the aircraft, it has the alliance, it has a Seattle gateway that's actually pulling connecting traffic from 80 cities, and it has a management team willing to say the ambition out loud, which is itself a kind of commitment. 3 things will settle it. Whether the pilot contract gets signed, because you cannot run a global airline with 2 separate workforces, whether the 12 destination target by 2030 actually materializes or stalls at 6, and whether Alaska hits its own promise of $1 billion in additional profit by 2027, because ambition without margin is just an expensive story. 94 years ago, this airline was a stowaway Stinson hauling furs out of Bristol Bay. Now it's flying Dreamliners to Rome and telling the world it belongs in the same sentence as Delta. The remarkable thing isn't whether that's true yet, it's that it's no longer ridiculous.